Episode 60 of the podcast. This week we're talking about humane. What does humane mean? Because it's quite a label and it's often just a heartfelt feeling. But let's bring some science into it. We're going to take a look at some of the standards of care for groomers. We're going to take a look at the humane hierarchy and what organizations are doing to try to define humane treatment. You're listening to the Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast. I'm Chrissy Neumeier-Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, certified behavior consultant for canines, certified professional dog trainer, and the owner of Happy Critters in Nashua, New Hampshire. And this, my friends and colleagues, is where grooming and training meet. This week, I want to talk about humane. What does humane mean? Because talk about labels, right? I mean, there's a word that we use so often in the animal world, but what does it truly mean? And what does it look like? How do we define it? How do we make sure that we are adhering to it? So I started this off with looking in the dictionary. What does the dictionary define humane? How does the dictionary define humane? Having or showing compassion or benevolence. Their example sentence, which actually uses animals, is regulations ensuring the humane treatment of animals. That's the example in the dictionary, right? I mean, yikes. So anyway, I also looked up the synonyms. Oh, I'm going to have all sorts of little flubs today. Sorry, guys. So the synonyms are things like compassionate, kind, kindly, kind-hearted, considerate, understanding, sympathetic, tolerant, civilized, good, good-natured, and gentle. Interesting, right? So then I looked up one of those, benevolence, right? That's from the definition, one of the other terms that just got listed since we're trying to search down what humane means. So benevolence, again, this is how I go down the rabbit hole, right? The quality of being well-meaning, kindness, synonyms for that. I can't say synonyms today. Anyway, kindness, kind-heartedness, goodwill, goodness, compassion, consideration, thoughtfulness, decency. So we're hearing an awful lot of kindness and goodness, right? And I think most pet pros are totally on board with that. Those are feelings that we are like, yeah, I'm in this because I love dogs. Like no one goes into working with dogs because it's a get-rich-quick scheme. You do it because you like dogs. Right? So we're all in terms of thinking, I need to have a relationship with these dogs. I want to have fun with these dogs. I like working with dogs and I want dogs to be treated well. I think that most of us have these really good intentions, but how do we operationalize that? That's kind of a training term. Like, how do we make that happen? How do we use it in the real world with our work with animals? So first I want to list off that for groomers, there's the PPGSA standards of care and the Professional Pet Groomers and Stylists Alliance. And they're kind of new, but the IPG, International Professional Groomers, the ISCC, the International Society for Canine Cosmetologists, and the NDGAA, which is the National Dog Groomers Association of America, those three organizations have decided to kind of come together and create this standards of care to get more of us all on board in the wake of what have been some tragedies in the grooming world. So the standards of care have been adopted pretty widely by industry and by different certifying organizations. Okay. So one of the things that they list, I kind of cherry picked the standards of care for this particular discussion. All personnel must conduct themselves in a manner that promotes the safe, humane, and compassionate handling and managing of pets. That sounds perfectly logical to all of us, right? But see, the thing is that when we're talking about humane, compassionate handling and managing, I think we all have a different idea of safe. Safe is a little bit easier to understand. Will it cause harm? Will it cause bodily harm? But when we talk about humane, compassionate handling and managing, it's still kind of up for interpretation. So part of why they wrote up these standards of care is to make sure that we're kind of working toward good skills, making sure that these animals are being well taken care of. So another statement from that, the safe and humane handling techniques, safe and humane use of pet restraints, which I talk about quite a bit about how I'm okay with using pet restraints and things that are safety equipment with a mindfulness of, is this dog learning that this is safe? Is this dog also, are we just using it to force the issue? Or are we using these tools to keep everybody safe while a dog is learning to trust us and be calm, comfortable, and cooperative? So moving on, one more statement that I pulled from the standards of care when I cherry picked for humane stuff, the safe and humane management of behavioral issues. Ooh, interesting. So what I find is that as groomers, we have a variety of ways that we tackle a behavioral problem. And for some of us, that's, well, it's got to get done. We're in this mindset that, he's going to have injuries to himself if we don't get these nails shorter. Nail trimming is a really important part of dog health. So we start thinking, well, I've got to get this mat off, or I've got to get these ears clean, or I have to get this done. So sometimes we're thinking in terms of safe and humane as I'm doing a kindness even if this dog freaks out, because this bodily action needs to be completed. And I'm trying to get people away from that idea that it needs to get done today. It's true, it needs to get done. But if it's something is so terrifying for a dog and it needs to be done today, I kind of like to send them for the vet for that. There's a point where perhaps sedating a dog to get something done is of value to us. And I don't think that as groomers, sedating a dog for us is a great idea. Even when I was grooming at an animal hospital, as a groomer in an animal hospital, not something I was really keen on, right? They can aspirate water. They can, all sorts of things can happen. Like there's a point where we say, all right, this needs to be under a doctor's supervision and admit if we're not comfortable with it. I don't think we should be doing it. So even if a customer comes in, their dog's kind of drowsy, I want you to kind of look and go, did you give him something? Because, that's not cool with me. I, as a professional, I don't want to take the risk of a dog who is sedated or on something. There are some risks. But we can't just look at, I need to get these nails done, I'm doing this dog a kindness. Because our job is to help keep this dog healthy, but not as a medical professional, as a groomer. Okay, so I want you to be thinking that safe and humane doesn't mean it doesn't matter what his brain learns today. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get that mat off his elbow or something. I don't want you to think in those terms. I don't want us to be in it, I'm going to do whatever it takes. There's a point where that's emergency medicine. Even if it's not looking medical to you, if we're going to totally freak that dog out, there's a label, right? But if that dog is going to turn into a thrashing, panicking, spray his anal glands and scream, that to me, behaviorally, is inhumane. And not because you're not trying to do something kind, but because that's pushing the boundaries of what we should be doing as groomers and pushing it into vet medicine. We should be saying, this is overwhelming for this dog today. He's not going to learn anything good about this, because we do want them to be good for us for the rest of their lives. We have a different relationship with these dogs than their vet does. We have to work with these dogs over and over and over again. So how do we draw lines as to what is humane and what is not? What is safe and what is not? What's a good use of pet restraints and what is not? What's good use of management and of behavioral issues and what is not? And the training world has come up with its own version of how to make that tangible, how to set up some guidelines for us to follow that I'd really like the grooming world to start to adopt. Because I think that if we start thinking in terms of, okay, this is, I'll go into it in the next segment, but the humane hierarchy, or LIMA, least intrusive, minimally aversive versions, right? If we start looking at what the dog training world is doing as an industry that parallels ours, because much like groomers, trainers are also often self-taught or taught through an apprenticeship, go through a certification process with one of the major organizations. Like in the training world, it's usually like the CCPDT, the IAABC, IACP, NADOI. So there are lots of different ways for trainers to get their education. They have their own version of standards that have been adopted and are working pretty well. So in the next part, I'm going to tell you more about that in hopes that the grooming industry can adopt some of this, because if we just say humane and safe, that means a variety of things. It's a little bit vague. It's still left to opinion. So let's bring it into a little bit more scientific terms so that we aren't just relying on the opinions that we have about if we're being humane and if we're being safe and if we're using our tools in a safe and humane way. If you're enjoying my podcast, please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. The dog training world, in its attempt to standardize a code of humane conduct, uses the humane hierarchy. It's got its flaws. It's still kind of debated as to how much more refining we need to do. But you know what? It's a good start. And I'd love to see groomers and vet offices really look at this model also and try to refine it, meet the unique needs of our situations, the situations of a vet visit, the situations of a grooming visit. And like I said, it's still being refined. There are times where that also turns into opinions. But I want you to think, so organizations like the IAABC, which is the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants, the CCPDT, Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers, and the APDT, the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, have adopted this general guideline. I believe it was Dr. Susan Friedman that started this guideline, and it was an article I read of hers that talks about how we still need to keep working on it because some of these standards are still a little bit up for debate. Again, anytime we can make this more scientific in less opinion, that's good. So let's go through the humane hierarchy in basic terms that I think are going to be a little bit easier for a dog owner to understand, or for a groomer who doesn't have a huge dog training vocabulary. Now, trainers, I want you to listen also, because sometimes often part of our job is to phrase things in such a way that someone with less understanding of dog behavior can understand us. So the first step, if you are approaching an issue, a training issue, a behavior issue, the first step in the humane hierarchy is to look for the health, nutrition, and physical factors. Is there something about this dog's health, this dog's biology, that is creating the behavior that we're having an issue with, or the behavior that we want to change? Things like that could be the dog that doesn't want his paw picked up. Is there something wrong with the paw? Could it be that the dog cannot stand for a long time? That we're just pushing this dog's physical abilities beyond what they can handle? Could it be that this dog has something neurological happening and that's causing aggression? Those are things that we need to look at first. If we are faced with a problem, with a behavior that we are struggling with, or a dog who is struggling, because again, they aren't trying to give us a hard time. A dog showing behavior problems is having a hard time themselves. So we need to first look at health, nutrition, physical factors. That's the first piece of the humane hierarchy. We always look at that first. Now, the second thing that we look at when we're looking at a behavior problem, and this one can be, I'm going to talk more in grooming terms, but environmental management. And what we mean by environmental management, are there ways that we can manipulate the environment or prevent the behavior? In training terms, it's the antecedent arrangement. But I want you to think about environmental management. Could be dog who is not in sight of other dogs. Like the dog that has problems with other dogs. Can we simply bypass that in a grooming setting? Can we set him up so he's got a sheet next to his crate and he can't physically see the other dogs? Perhaps that is enough to lessen the problem that we're seeing. That should still play a role in teaching him something new, because we want to minimize the amount of distraction level. So I want you to think about environmental management as things like the distraction level. And there are a couple different ways that the D's, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the D's, but there's distance, duration, distraction levels. I want you to think about there are ways that we can minimize those, and that's environment. If I choose to do something for a shorter amount of time, that's an environmental management. That's kind of changing the way I do things, kind of changing the way things work to see if we can improve a behavior that we do want, right? I know it gets a little tricky, but that's the second step. Take a look at the environment. Take a look at what is happening. So for instance, a lot of people in their homes have problems with like dogs that get up on the back of the couch and bark out the picture window. And sometimes that's a big problem when they're not home. So they don't let them in the living room when they're not home. Ta-da! It might not be the solution, but if we can manage the problem when we're not home, then we can work on a solution when we have time, when we can put in effort, when we can be there. Okay, so that's an example of in managing the environment. If a dog is really afraid of drying next to their ears, sometimes we can use just some extra towels and really get in there with those towels and get them dry and keep brushing it through and avoid the use of the dryer while he's learning. Doesn't mean forever, but that's environmental management. That's controlling the world around the dog and what the behavior is. So that's the second step if we're looking at the humane hierarchy. Third step in the humane hierarchy is positive reinforcement training and classical conditioning. So I know we've talked about these before, but I never know if people are starting the podcast at like the most current episode or at the first episode, but as the most current episode, positive reinforcement is when you see a behavior that you like and you add something that the dog finds pleasant to increase that behavior, to have that behavior happen more often or happen longer, but it increases that behavior. Positive reinforcement. So it's not about the mood. Positive is the adding of. Reinforcement is the reinforcing of. So if we see a dog who's being really, really calm in the tub, and that's not usual for them, or that's the behavior that we are really looking for, and we tell him, good boy, and give him a cookie, and the dog continues to be calm, that could be positive reinforcement. If the dog continues to be worried and does not increase their behavior, it might have just been a cookie. So positive reinforcement is training. It's teaching. It's acting on what we see. It's acting on a behavior that we want to increase. We're adding something pleasant, hoping it comes out better, hoping that it keeps happening. Classical conditioning is different. So positive reinforcement is part of operant conditioning. Okay. Classical conditioning is different. Classical conditioning is when we see a dog having a little bit of a hard time, or maybe we're introducing something brand new and we're just making it a fun party. We're giving it a party vibe. We're like, hey, look how awesome this is. That's kind of when we like add food to, nail trimming, or add food to being touched all over, or add food to having a doctor, manipulate their leg. That's when we're adding food just to make it a party. That's different than actually teaching them that their behavior gives them the food. That's just teaching them, hey, look how fun this is. Now, classical conditioning is part of that third step. Positive reinforcement and classical conditioning are ideal ways to teach a dog, hey, by the way, here is something that you should be worried about, and here are some things I want you to do. Okay? These things are highly effective, but you have to know what you're doing. Right? So part of why I have an issue with some of the training out there is because sometimes trainers are teaching things that don't translate to grooming. In that case, it would seem like it's ineffective, but really it's the training setup that didn't apply well to the grooming setup. I know, big can of worms there, right? So if we look at classical conditioning and making it a party vibe, like, hey, look how fun this is. That can be great for a dog who doesn't have much experience or is learning about something new. But a dog who already has a significant behavior problem, we could just be putting cookies into a process that the dog already is not interested in liking. So classical conditioning isn't necessarily a good way to work on a dog who fights us, is growling, is showing teeth, right? Like we need to work a different version than, hey, I'm just adding cookies. Because a lot of dogs will bite you with a cookie. They don't care. They're like, yeah, you can add cookies all you want. Or they're so stressed out that they won't take any sort of a reward and they won't take cookies and they aren't at the slightest bit interested in peanut butter. So we need to be aware of training methods for this individual dog in these circumstances. So the first 3 steps of the humane hierarchy, the first one, health, nutrition, physical factors. The second one, environmental management. Can you manipulate or prevent that behavior from happening just by changing the things around you? And the third one is using positive reinforcement or classical conditioning. The third one is like food, treats, toys, all right, and teaching. Now, the 4th and 5th levels of the humane hierarchy, before you reach those, you should have tried 1, 2, and 3. All right. And when you get into 4th and 5th, they also recommend that's when you consult with a colleague before you move on to 4th or 5th. Now, I like to consult with colleagues anyway, so I don't think I would wait. But 4th or 5th is when we start deciding I'm just going to live with it or I'm going to manage it. That's number 4. Like, okay, I'm just going to manage it. That's the dog who is never allowed in the living room when nobody's home because they're just managing it. Like they aren't interested in working on the behavior at all. They just took that environmental management and ended there. And the behavior's still there, but they're blocking it. All right, not great, but managing a behavior could be the dog that is always, always, always cage dried because we just choose to not even take on the whole putting the dryer near them, right? I think we know dogs like that where we're just like, all right, you know what? We're just going to live with it. Whatever, you know. I would hope for better than just living with it because it is an important part of their life. So living with it, managing the behavior also includes things like negative punishment, negative reinforcement, and extinction. Extinction is to give you an example of extinction is when a dog just keeps trying to like pull their way out of a crate. They're banging at the door, banging at the door, banging at the door until finally they realize the door's never going to open. Not a really effective way to train, right? It's really not going. For many dogs, they would just continue until they ripped a claw, you know. So we want to, before we reach a point where we're just like, yeah, I'm going to kind of get out of this. I'm just going to give up. Hopefully he'll figure out that that's not going to work. Before we go to just giving up, we should consult with other colleagues, other groomers, other trainers, a behavior consultant, the vet, you know, like just consult, talk to other people. And you know what? I find that sometimes we always think that we need to go to someone with more experience than us or another professional that's higher level or something. Tell you what, everybody can teach somebody something. And sometimes it's somebody who's brand new, has no background, that has the most fantastic idea. So I like talking to anybody, but get another set of eyes. Get somebody else's opinion. Start thinking out of the box. Like, how can I go back to one of those other more positive versions? Now, the fifth one out of the humane hierarchy, the last ditch effort is positive punishment, which again, positive isn't the emotion, it's the adding of, and punishment isn't an emotion either, it's the decrease in behavior. That behavior that we're seeing that we don't like, that we're going to add something so the dog doesn't do it again. Right? I want you to think about some of the versions of positive punishment or things like a leash jerk, a sharp no, right? But think about like the times when we are actively trying to make him stop, knock it off, right? It's the last step. And it's still in there as part of the humane hierarchy because in some cases, that is still appropriate to do after you've tried everything else. And you know what? I learned to work with dogs in the mid 80s. I was doing training and I was learning about grooming. I was a pressure bather in the mid 80s. And that was kind of what we used a lot of. And I've seen it fail over and over and over and over and over again. And it's hard to take something that you do and say, you know what? I'm going to take a closer look. Is this really working? Yeah, you know what? It's really not. It's hard to do, but that's why we need to look at the dog we see today, the thing that we are doing, the behaviors that we want to increase, the behaviors we want to decrease, and really take a critical eye and say, are we seeing improvement or not? Right? Because that's where the problem is. And so many things we're just taking advice or we're looking at it like it's a recipe, like, oh, do this and this and this. I'm doing it right. Don't know why it's not working. We just need to look, is it working or not? So humane is a big, big, big topic because we all want to be humane. We just need to get on the same page for what those standards of care can be, what they are. And even if we disagree, I want you to have an awareness of why you chose that. Like, why do I feel like that is humane? Why do I feel like that matches up with the least intrusive, minimally aversive? That's Lima. Like why I feel that does it, why I feel like that matches one of the steps in the humane hierarchy, because then we can discuss. We can discuss it. Perhaps you will sway me to your vision of that, and I will say, wow, that was an awesome idea, right? Because if we actually are looking at things like the humane hierarchy and we're thinking about it, we can come up with new answers. Okay. But to say it's safe and humane handling techniques, there are lots of things that I see with a loving, caring groomer, a really good person who adores dogs that I look at and say, I do not think that was safe or humane. And not because they're a bad person. This isn't a personality test. This is a judgment-free zone, friends. All right. That's not what it is. But to look and say, I don't think that's safe and humane. If we want to have safe and humane handling techniques, safe and humane use of pet restraints, safe and humane management of behavioral issues, and those are straight out of the PPGSA standards of care that grooming organizations are adopting, then we also need to think about what humane is. And I know this episode went long, and here comes a plow. Great. But if we know what to look for, then we can better define humane. Instead of this wishy-washy feel-good word, let's actually give it some meaning. Your weekly action step this week, I want you to look up the humane hierarchy, Google it, go ahead, read everything you can about it. And I also want you to look up the PPGSA Standards of Care. Read it. Take a closer look. And whether you're a trainer or a groomer, I want you to look at both of these. I think they're very important for both fields to take a look at. If you'd like to talk to me, you can find me through my grooming and training business, happycrittersdogtraining.com, my email, chrissy@happycritters.net, and through the Creating Great Grooming Dogs Facebook page. And we have these awesome devices in our pockets that allow us to do live video with each other. I can help you with the dog on your table. We can set up live lessons, and you may be surprised at how much we can get accomplished together via video.